Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Massachusetts General Hospital telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients, and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist setting. We both consult with a number of traditional and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better for the clinician and for the patient. MedTech Insights is a live weekly interactive talk show where we interview two guests in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon. We did miss a couple, so we are a little rusty in getting back into it. Thank you for the little summer break. It's interactive. If you're watching, please tell us who you are, what you're doing, where you're watching from, and type in any questions that you have for our audience. We love to feature you in the show. We love to be interactive. We love to answer your questions. You can watch us live every Tuesday at 12 noon. You can watch us through the MedTech Insights Facebook page, Ami or my personal Facebook page, the Vanguard.Health YouTube page, and my personal LinkedIn. All shows are recorded and available after the fact on our website, Vanguard.Health/MedTech Insights. Be sure to keep up with the show by joining our mailing list and look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And Ami, what are we going to talk about? Don't forget to talk about we're moving into conference season. Okay, over to you.
That is, you didn't even have to prompt me. It was on the top of my list. So for those others who are suffering from the first week of back to school, which is like much harder than any other job, is kind of getting those kids oriented. Congratulations to you for making it. And now we get to settle into really thinking about the fall. And despite the fact that we work in a January to December calendar year, for many of us, it feels like work starts again after a little bit of a slowdown in August, and here in September we come. So looking ahead, Biomed device conference in Boston is coming up. We're extraordinarily excited for that, September 21st and 22nd.
Anybody excited? I think you and I have a panel. We have an in real life panel.
We have an IRL panel. We're going to be on a stage, masked, but talking to the audience and able to engage again in community. So we're excited for that here in Boston. We also have HLTH coming up. Boston's kind of central this time. So see Miami and Austin and San Francisco. Here we come. We're coming back. And so HLTH is coming up as well in October. The World Heart Federation actually had a kickoff meeting for their kind of digital health work globally, starting to think about digital cardiology and how we're going to change things. And so those meetings have started, at least in our cardiac end of the world. And so I think it's really a great opportunity for both societies, academia, and businesses who have meetings coming up to start thinking about what does digital health mean now as we hopefully at some point exit this pandemic. And I realize the world is still in it and many parts of our country are still in it. But one thing that is changing is the laws are changing. And we're noticing that we're going to have things in place that are not waivers, but that are permanent changes in care. And as we move also from fee for service to value-based care, that's where today's conversation comes in, is really thinking about how do you set up the infrastructure to be able to allow patients to continue to get care at home. What does the care continuum really mean, from hospital to a clinic to a home to perhaps a skilled nursing facility? And for children even, how do you provide care in the schools or when kids are at college and make that coherent with the care that they were getting at home? So I think it affects people of all ages. There's a care continuum, but it needs an infrastructure. And the people we have today are able to talk about that with Patient Ping. We also then need to think about healthcare more broadly. Not just the provision of clinical care, but what are we doing to advance health? And there is so much that the digital realm has for us to take and learn from in terms of research, enrolling patients, and doing it in an equitable manner to really move health ahead that's relevant to everybody who could potentially partake in some of these new treatments. So with that, we have two great guests today. Jen, other things you want to update people on?
Yeah,
you look ready to tell them more stuff. There's more stuff coming.
It's conference season. So we're going to do a Clubhouse panel discussion. Is that right?
Yes, we have a Clubhouse panel discussion September 23rd at 5 p.m. So you can find us there. What else do we have coming up?
I will be running / moderating an American Medical Association home virtual care telehealth boot camp thing next week, and I'll be more specific on my details coming.
Fantastic.
I'll be more prepared too.
Perfect. And then I guess one more thing that's important to mention is the Applied Health Innovation Consortium is also coming up later in October. We are not going to hold it in Washington, D.C. in person. It's going to be virtual. And as we get closer to October, we'll give you some dates and times on those as well. But again, thinking about applied health, thinking about innovation and bringing lots of different groups together, again, similar to the show, bringing investors, bringing companies, and then bringing clinicians and engineers all together. So a lot of important change.
So we really enjoy our new audience, our old audience, Eric Cohen, founder of The Pump, the Reebok, was it the Reebok Pump?
Maybe I think it was. Eric can correct us if we're wrong. Yeah.
Glad that you're watching. Love to have you participate in the show. Dr. Borb, internist, working in commercial strategy. Really exciting to have you join us. Please let us know if you have any questions for our guest, and we have some great guests that we're going to feature today.
Perfect. Time to bring them on, Jen. Should we do it? All right. We will start with Neal Vachhani. So Neal is at Patient Ping, which is now just recently Bamboo Health. Neal has led operations at various tech-enabled services and software delivery growth companies, including QuickPlay, which was acquired by AT&T DirecTV. Patient Ping, now acquired by Appriss Health, and they've renamed themselves Bamboo Health. And prior to operating startups, Neal led operation transformations for global services delivery organizations while he was at McKinsey & Company in Boston, in Amsterdam, and then really throughout Asia. He has an engineering degree from MIT, so comes to us with the science and the business sides. And we're really excited to talk with Neal about all the changes that have happened both at Patient Ping, but how instrumental Patient Ping and infrastructure have been to changing us towards really value-based care and a care continuum. Neal, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Love the special effects. Thank you for the warm welcome and the applause.
So it's great to have you with us. The timing could not be better because we're really seeing a lot of companies and a lot of clinicians move towards saying we have to provide healthcare to our patients in a continuous and not an episodic mechanism. And we need to do that also in a fashion that is not reactionary, but really being proactive. And we sometimes call it preventive health, but it's not even that. It's proactive. It's active surveillance. It's recognizing where our patients might be in their trajectory and meeting them there. So maybe let's start a little bit, Neal, if you don't mind, because we have quite a few actually students who are watching too. You started as an engineer at MIT. And then you ended up really being an operations business guy who seems to, every company he is involved in starting is acquired. So our students are watching and thinking, how do I do this? Will you tell us a little bit about your kind of origin story and how you ended up here before we talk about the company?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So thanks for having me again. I'd say a true engineer at heart, always loved building things, solving problems, incessant curiosity. I think these are the attributes I'm sure that most of the students in the crowd here also share. And it was that actually drew me first into management consulting as a first stepping stone in my career, broadly because it offered a range of different topics to learn about very quickly. You'd find out on Friday afternoon what company you were going to be working for effectively on Monday morning. Over the weekend, you'd get a download of a ton of information and you get up to speed really quickly. And what really, I think, drew me to that was the opportunity to learn a lot about different topics, to see how business operates across different industry groups. So I spent time in the high-tech industry, the telecom industry, banking and retail and healthcare, industrials. And there's some common themes across services delivery, across all those largely regulated industries, which is eventually what drew me to healthcare, is that it's really hard to make services delivery work well at scale for all the constituents, not just for the customers of that service, which might be the patient, it might be the family applying for a mortgage, it might be the person who's just looking to get their utilities and their cable up and running when it goes down, but also for the hardworking folks that deliver those services in those organizations. And what I saw through that experience was an opportunity for technology to just make that better for everybody involved, make it more efficient and more effective, and a smoother experience. And so I saw applying some technical background to these real business challenges of how do you scale, how do you deliver better? And really the marriage of the two is what led me to pursue my career in tech-enabled services. And then eventually landed in healthcare because that to me felt like one of the most complex services delivery systems out there. At a time when, on the backs of meaningful use and the proliferation of EHRs, there was just a lot of technology out there. But what I was hearing from my good friends, including present company, is that it's not always working for us. And so how do you do your part to remove small pieces of friction along the way? And that's really what we believe we're trying to do at Patient Ping.
That's fantastic. And so, a few things that I take away from this. One is after you go learn in all those industries, please bring everything you learn, students, to healthcare and help us because we can use it and we provide you lots of opportunities. But also when we think about tech-enabled care, you and Patient Ping started thinking about this long before the rest of us did. And so maybe we can start by telling the audience a little bit about Patient Ping, what you guys are and what you do, just to get everybody on the same page. And then we'll pepper you with some questions from the audience and from us.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. Thanks for the slides, Jen. So Patient Ping is the largest, most diverse care coordination community in the country. And let me just describe how we think about care coordination and then the network that we've built over the last 8 years. And then a really concrete use case that I think will express how we think this can be helpful. So there's a basic belief, and I think you touched on this with the commentary around the care continuum, which is that caring especially for high needs patients, vulnerable patients, complex chronic patients is challenging, and it takes a community. You cited many different actors in the ecosystem. It's no longer a world where there's just one local doc that everybody goes to, but there's just a variety of different organizations and actors that need to be connected. And that's really what led to the start of Patient Ping. The origin story is when the accountable care organizations started getting formed, there was this lack of knowledge of where patients were going. Where were they and where had they been? And it becomes really hard for somebody in value-based care to longitudinally manage care if they don't know where their patients are showing up. And they could be going to the ED down the street, they could be on vacation and have some injury in a state that you're just completely disconnected from. And that makes it hard for the provider to take care of their patient. And the patient at that facility is likely going to get unnecessary care because nobody knows context. And that was really the genesis of what caused Patient Ping to be born. So now, if I fast forward, what Patient Ping has done is built this activated national provider community. There's 1,100 hospitals across 48 states, including Mass General Brigham and the Steward Systems and many of the hospitals here in Massachusetts. Over 6,000 post-acute facilities, so skilled nursing facilities, home health agencies, IRFs, and rehab facilities, LTACs, et cetera, along with several hundred provider groups that are increasingly focused on specific disease conditions and going really deep and vertical on a patient population, as well as some novel advanced primary care like the Iora Healths of the world. I know that some folks from there were guests of yours, as well as those that are focusing on specific lines of business. So the novel Medicare Advantage plans out there like the Oak Street Healths, and those that are focusing on complex chronic and frail elderly like Landmark Health. And we connect all of these providers and programs in a real-time network. And really the backbone of that is what's called the ADT feed. It stands for Admit, Discharge, and Transfer. And every EHR, or electronic health record, from an acute or a post-acute setting, emits that real-time signal. Anytime a patient presents and is registered at intake, there is this real-time signal that goes out from that provider. We aggregate all of that real-time data. So we can tell you that, hey, Ami has shown up at this ED, and if you subscribe to our network, then you're notified in real time. At the same time, wherever the patient shows up, we provide valuable clinical and administrative context from outside of that system. Where were they before they showed up? who is on their extended care team? Who's their next of kin in case you need to get a hold of somebody? What is their latest home phone number and address? What are the prior diagnoses that they've had? So this context, we believe, allows clinicians to make more informed decisions during the course of that encounter. And we see about 96 million encounters a year to that.
That's just amazing. I look at those names, and so first of all, we've been so excited to have some of those companies, like you mentioned, Oak Street Health and Ira Health on the show. But it's interesting because when they come, one of the things they talk about is the fact that they are able to actually follow their patients and know what is happening. That is what enables those companies to do everything that they do, right? Along with all the other aspects, of course. But I think that's so essential. We talk a lot about interoperability of electronic health records. And this seems like interoperability plus. It's actually more than that, right? It's not just I want access to where else you've been, but it's I want to understand real time when you're going there. For me as a cardiologist, if somebody is readmitted within 3 days to another institution and I learn about it at their 6-month visit, there is all kinds of care that could have happened in that interim had I just known that that was the case. And so it's interesting. It gives me more than just you can have patient records from somewhere. It's what's actually happening in their journey, if you will. And then how do we take that and the other information and put it together to provide better health? This might be a good time actually to bring out Dr. Gliklich too, because I see him nodding backstage and he also has some experience in this. So let me introduce Rich Gliklich.
So as you're pulling up the introduction, Eric Cohen, thank you, founder of the Reebok Pump Wave. Okay, the kids today are not going to know what that was, but it was like the hip thing. I had that. You pumped up your shoe. You're like, why would I pump up my shoe? I mean, not.
No, it's possible though. I mean, Air Jordan's cool again, right? So Reebok Pump may make a comeback, Eric. Like there's a hope, you know.
Yeah, I know. I've seen these trucks that just pull up and open their doors and like people stand in line for shoes. And then Dr. Samuel Williams is watching. Thanks for watching. He's the medical director of Magellan.Health. Glad to have everyone watching. Okay, introducing Dr. Gliklich.
Dr. Richard Gliklich is the CEO of OM1. It's a data and technology company focused on organizing health information to support medical research, outcomes, measurement, and personalized medicine. Previously, he was founder and CEO of Outcome. He led that from inception through its acquisition. And he was an XR with General Catalyst Partners previous to that. He's well known in the area of registries, outcomes, and analytics. And he's actually senior editor of the landmark publication by the U.S. Agency for Healthcare, the AHRQ handbook, that's Registries for Evaluating Patient Outcomes. I love having him here. He's a frequent speaker and author on really using high quality real world data, right? And that's what Neal is providing right now to us, and advanced analytics, but using it now for drug development, peri-approval monitoring, and then value-based care and clinical decision support. So excited to bring Rich on along with Neal. Rich,
Hello.
great to have you with us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So, thinking about this in a broader perspective for a moment, when we think about patient outcomes and the information that we're getting in order to be able to inform what we're doing long term, I'm going to ask you to wear your current hat as CEO, but maybe combine your AHRQ hat with that. Where do you see us going? So obviously, please tell us a little bit about OM1, but there's a lot of questions and a lot of them are asking both of you to say, where do we go next once we have this information? And I'm looking at the time and I don't want us to run out on answering that question. So Rich, I'll have you jump in first.
Yeah, so let me give you the quick couple lines on what OM1 is. As you said, health data and technology company that's organizing health information and using AI to accelerate medical research, measure outcomes, and to personalize care. We do this through partnering with health systems, providers, medical specialty societies, create networks that gather together a lot of data, process that at scale, including unstructured, clinical notes that get de-identified to really pull out endpoints and then use that information to both measure outcomes and then ultimately predict them. So to get to your question, if we change the paradigm and we move from measuring quality, which really is kind of process checkboxes that go back to Toyota, what Toyota did in the 1970s, and start looking at individual outcomes. If you do that, the technology today, basically, if you're able to measure outcomes, you can start to predict them. You can use AI to predict them. We can move from kind of a relatively data agnostic world in healthcare. I mean, it's hard to believe, but we are relatively data agnostic, to data-driven decision-making that will change care. And that's really, I think probably all your listeners, their focus is how do I impact healthcare? And that's the big opportunity through data.
I love that concept. So Neal, I'm going to ask you the same question, slightly different though. We talked about companies, we talked about hospitals and doctors. Patient adoption, patient understanding, the ability of patients to engage in this. They all say they want to. Every survey we have done nationally for the past 2 years, and then some actually, I've been doing telemedicine for 7 years now, and patients always want more. But how much more can they engage in, and how do we get them to engage? From your perspective, since the name is Patient Ping, can we talk a little bit about that patient side? And I think you may even have an example of a company or case that you worked with.
Yeah, no, I think the backdrop is the shift from the reactive care to the proactive care that you were describing earlier. And I think our perspective on it, and my perspective on it, is you can't think about patients as one sort of monolithic group, but rather a series of segments and different cohorts. And so just to contrast it, you certainly have a cohort of frail, elderly, multiple comorbidities, for whom it's almost impossible, even if they have that inclination, to manage their own care or to be as engaged as you want them to be. I think there the strategy, if you will, is to allow them to be connected to the system and to the appropriate caregivers. I'll contrast that with an emergent group of, well, I'm going to have my own electronic health record on my iPhone, and I want to be really involved in not just being informed, but perhaps even driving my own care decisions and journey. And that's an entirely different group. And what we believe is it's hard. We want to sort of provide the ability to care and connect with both groups, quite frankly. And we have customers of ours that provide care targeted to either segment. And so our obligation is to break down the barriers and the frictions and drive interoperability so that people can be aware of when patients in either cohort have acute and post-acute encounters, so that their data can flow freely, and so the appropriate community members can get engaged. And I define the latter cohort as one of the community members, since they're more active in owning their own care, for sure.
That's great. That's great. So I guess when we're talking about moving forward with taking this data and changing, so clinical decision support is something that's familiar to us as clinicians. In the research arena, Rich, though, we're starting to get more digitized just because COVID made us do that, right? We had to start enrolling patients differently. We've had some people on the show who've done point of care testing. We've talked about the utility of doing point of care work. To be able to make patients, make the patient journey easier when they're participating in research, right? But where else can we go? Because you have talked and written a lot about the concept of what the future of research looks like with the utility of big data like this.
Yeah, let me give you an example, and maybe we kind of talk about clinical implementation too in a few minutes. But we have a tool called Patient Finder, which is basically using AI against big databases to look for phenotypic markers of patients who may have a disease, may have a subtype of the disease, may be more or less responsive to a particular treatment. So for example, we have now one that's identifying patients who have a much higher likelihood of having Fabry disease. And Fabry disease, as you know, often doesn't get diagnosed for 4, 5, 6 years after initial presentation, but those patients have a signal in terms of the specialists they see, the symptoms they present with, that the AI can detect. And then those patients can be identified, referred for genotyping, either go into clinical trials or go into treatment. But that's an example of using a tool directly to go from millions of patients down to a handful that either would be candidates for clinical trials or treatment.
I love that concept because right now, we just finished up a randomized trial with Janssen. And one of the things that we were commenting on in our review is that you do really take all comers for these trials sometimes, and it's great. However, we already know that there's a subset that can probably respond better. And it's not in order to make a trial more successful. I don't think that's what any of the investigators really want. It's in order to find the right cohort that is going to respond and then get that to them faster. And we're almost slowed down by enrolling people who may not be exactly what we're looking for. And so I love this concept. Jen, if there are questions in the audience, I know you have a different stream that you're looking at than I am.
I do have it. Oh, okay. We do just have Eric saying, right on, Neal. You have to meet people in the way that they feel the most comfortable, which is very important.
It's so true. My clinic yesterday, in fact, had I was laughing when you were talking, Neal, just because had exactly that. Young people who were sending me, different Apple Watch and other readings in their Garmin. And then I had an older woman where we actually all clapped because she got her video to work. And she was so proud. And we were too. And like the nurse and I and her were clapping. And it was, it was success in a different way, but everybody was very happy.
Rich, you were at an off-site clinic, right? No, wait, okay, sorry.
No, I'm virtual on Mondays. You're right. And I'm in person. Yeah.
Eric does have a question, which is, how are we using data? And, there will be difficult questions or suggestions that come up that the data will prompt. Eric is bringing up mental health as how do you have that discussion? I think we've all had the discussion of, if AI could tell me that I was going to have Alzheimer's in 5 years, how would I handle that? So I don't know if we want to tackle that discussion or...
I got a quick comment on it. I mean, I think let me narrow into a very specific use case. So we have a model now that identifies patients who are likely to end up with treatment-resistant depression. So that's a perfect use case in the mental health space where if a patient is not going to respond in the next 2 years to a series of SSRIs or SNRIs, and you can identify them and change that course of therapy, you can get them to effective treatment much more rapidly. And that's very true in the mental health space, I believe.
That's huge. Yeah. Because right now you just go through SSRIs and there's no like precision medicine around it. You just have an algorithm. You're like, sometimes this works for this group, sometimes it works for that group. And you actually have to do the onboarding. The onboarding takes like 3 to 6 weeks, test it. They're miserable. And then try another one if it doesn't work. And it's just this slow, tedious, terrible process.
Yeah. I'll add, however, I think 2 things. So one is it's a great question. September, in fact, is suicide kind of prevention awareness month. And so important to recognize we just really have very high rates of anxiety and depression that have only gone up during COVID. And so I think there's incredible benefit in being able to help people identify that there is something. I also think, however, simultaneously, the stigma associated with mental health really needs to continue to be addressed. And that's kind of everybody's job. And I think if we can do those 2 things hand in hand, Eric, which is identify who those patients are and at the same time make sure that we are reducing that stigma. And that goes from things like, is this a disease that ends up on an insurance card? And that's true for mental health or physical health, right? People maybe don't want to know. Maybe the timing of when they find out is inconvenient for their applying for life insurance. So I think there's, a lot of things to be said about data. And there's probably a lot to be said. Maybe I'll turn this into a question then about people and who controls their data. Can I ask? I know it's a very large discussion that could take a day, but I'm sure you have these discussions internally at Patient Ping and at OM1, just talking about how that data works. Will you touch just a little bit on those who are out there and worried about, what happens to my data, what your overarching thought is about the future of data and how we keep people safe? Neal, maybe you first and then Rich.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. No, it's definitely a very deep and thoughtful discussion around data use. And so all the several thousand providers that I had mentioned that are connected to our network have signed on for a certain data use arrangement that really is for treatment purposes and requires that there is clear attribution and care relationships between the patients that we monitor and the providers that have access to that data. And it's really for that purpose only, for care coordination. And I think everybody has sort of taken that leap forward, and I really applaud them for doing that because they realize that it's for the interest of all the members of the community for this particular use case. Now that said, we have we're high trust certified. Everybody in the organization is fully current on all HIPAA and privacy rules, and sometimes there are situations where these questions come up, like how did you find out if a patient or a provider is notified? And so we address those as they come, but we take that data privacy very, very seriously.
Rich, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue. So today, there's actually a dichotomy between the US and Europe, for example. And so in the US, for research purposes, de-identification of data, then you can go through an IRB with a waiver of consent, often if it's not prospective, and use data for research, and that works. But of course, if you're going to actually utilize data for AI and personalizing care, you need the patient's consent. So that's very clear. In Europe, you already need consent really for any research use, essentially, to follow patients prospectively, and that's what we do in Europe. And I do think the US is going to shift in that direction as well.
That's great. So thinking now about, you were talking about clinical implementation, Rich, and there's a question, one of our audience members would like to just know, your thoughts on clinical implementation in the next year or two, and how we're going to be able to change the delivery of healthcare. And Neal, I'm going to go ahead and pose that to you next as well. How quickly can we move, I guess, is my question too, to add to that, right?
So, I think, we had a conversation a couple of days ago, and I said, I think that the AI works now for clinical decision-making. It's really the culture of medicine that needs to change. We're resistant to it, but we're not resistant in an active way. We're either not incentivized or we haven't done the implementation science to get there. But just give you a couple of quick examples. We have a partnership with Dell Medical Center in Austin, where we've developed a tool called Joint Insights, which actually tells a patient at the time of a consultation with a surgeon as to their individual likelihood of improving or worsening with a specific surgery and their complication rate, down to the percentage level of their symptoms. That changes the whole context of care. And it's incredibly empowering to the patient to make a decision based on that. But the implementation part is the challenge. Where in the workflow do you put it in? How do the IT systems talk to each other? Who's going to get paid for that extra visit, et cetera? So I think the focus really needs to be on the implementation science.
That's great. From a clinician's perspective, I will say, so the Society of Thoracic Surgery, the STS, has a database, and based on that, we can do a risk score for cardiac surgery. We've been doing this for a while. And a lot of cardiology actually has great guidelines and even algorithms for care provision. So we are so close to clinical decision support. We are so close to AI that it feels like it's right around the corner, but the terminology is right. And we talked about this a couple of days ago, which is talking about adoption implies that there is something active that the clinician or the system, more the clinician, needs to do to make it happen. And that is an exhausting thought in the era of burnout right now for a lot of clinicians. And so implementation puts that a little bit more back to the infrastructure, which is how can we create something that, as Neal mentioned, as easily as possible can take away some of those pain points in providing care and make things better and easier. And so we really do look to hospital systems, group practices, administration, and IT to help make that happen. And I like implementation science better than promoting provider adoption. I think both are important, but sometimes just changing the terminology helps change the culture. Neal, your thoughts in the next 2 years? Patient Ping, Apris Health, now Bamboo Health, you guys are growing and moving. How much can we change? What do you see healthcare looking like for, you and your family, let's say, in the next 2 years that we can advance using this kind of tech-enabled healthcare?
Yeah, I think there's a lot.
I'm not pushing. I'm pushing 2 years. Come on, Jen. Let me push a little. We do the 5-year, 10-year horizon a lot.
I think if we can move the needle on one area, it's really around lowering the barriers to adopt and utilize a variety of these really impactful care programs and pathways that are available for specific patients in their time of need. The thing that I've observed is that there are hundreds of these organizations that are coming up. We were talking about mental health earlier. There's organizations that are doing a dynamite job of helping people in various age groups using novel therapies. Really just getting patients connected into those programs remains to be a challenge. The same thing is true for novel cardiac care and chronic kidney disease. Jen and I were discussing today. And so my view is if we can do something to make the available kind of relevant inventory of programs available and increase awareness for the clinician and the social worker and the case manager at that point of discharge to say, hey, these are the places. Now, I wouldn't go so far as a recommendation or a prescription of, the patient should get connected to program X or Y. Our obligation is make them aware there is capacity, it's really relevant and impactful, and really amplify the ability for the discharge team, for example, to make the right decision, connect patients to those services.
That's great. And I think that can be done at the level of, an IOR Health or a company can be done at the level of a hospital, right? It can be done at the level of an insurance company. And so I think there are a lot of people. I would even make a plug for the societies to think about this. We as large academic societies are often looking for how do we really get down to the patient level. And I think this is one of those things where we'd be helping our clinicians. I will take this moment to say all four of us, although Rich is the CEO, all four of us represent ourselves and not necessarily the companies who we are mentioning or speaking about. Great. So I think we're in line. It goes so fast for kind of last minute thoughts. So maybe Rich, I'll give you first dibs of last thoughts, and then Neal to you. Anything we didn't cover that you really want the audience to hear and think about?
I think the closing message, I think probably from both Neal and I, are that you can make a huge impact in healthcare through data and through applying data. And I think that is the future.
Wonderful. Neal?
Yeah, no, I would echo that. And the more timely that decision-making is, that the thing that I observe is there are certain moments where you can really impact the patient's journey. And if you can catch them at that time and present that clinical trial that is really relevant for them, it can really change the course of that patient's trajectory favorably.
That's our holy grail right there. That is it. That's right. Jennifer, last thoughts for you.
Very excited about our guest. Thanks for coming on this show. Rich, really excited about this future of precision medicine that you're taking us into and having meaningful conversations. I'm tempted to pop myself into a predictor. I don't know what I'm going to predict myself for. Maybe a knee replacement. And Neal, thanks for all the amazing work that you're doing with Patient Ping. Both Neal and Rich are local, so we really love us supporting the Boston digital health ecosystem and utilizing data to transform the world. Thank you to our audience members for following us. We'll be here next Tuesday. So thanks to our guests, and Ami, great job hosting the show as always.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Great guest today. And as always, if you think of additional things, feel free to reach out on social media and continue the conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.